If Hollywood ever told the true story of the Spanish conquest of the Aztec, it would be the greatest action movie of all time. The following events that we're about to cover are described by both the Spanish and the Aztec themselves. This is the true story of Hernán Cortés and the Spanish conquest of Mexico. Viewer discretion is advised. The decade before the conquest, the Spaniards had enslaved the entire population on the island of Hispaniola. Holy men who ended up being whistleblowers to the crown reported seeing natives being tortured with dog attacks, having their arms cut off. One friar even described a scene where there was a mass burning of Native Americans, like a ritualistic burning that was used to intimidate the population. The treatment was so horrible that the crown even made new laws that tried to prevent the indiscriminate killing and torturing of Native Americans. Enforcement of those laws would prove to be very difficult so far away. Hernán Cortés is the main character in today's episode, and he might have been the sharpest of all conquistadors. In the book Conquistador Voices, they describe him as dangerously intelligent, persuasive, and bold, never waiting for permission, only seizing whatever opportunities came his way. As a teenager in Spain, Cortés became obsessed with tales of the Indies. At just 19 years old in 1504, he set sail for Hispaniola to start a new life. Within a few short years, he owned land, enslaved natives, and had already begun climbing the social ladder. An opportunity to colonize Cuba presented itself, and after a quick conquest and pacification of the natives that lived there, Cortés found himself with even more Native American slaves, land, and gold. A slave hunting expedition heading west from Cuba would soon change everything. It was 1517 and the conquistadors were still blind to the true scale of the world around them. Florida was thought to be just another island. No one yet realized the wealthy civilization waiting on the mainland. That year, Francisco de Cordoba led a small fleet into unknown waters. They landed on the coast of the Yucatan, and what they found was nothing like the island tribes that they were used to fighting. Here, the Spaniards faced warriors who lived in stone temples and towering monuments. These were the remnants of the Maya civilization, but still powerful enough to fight the small Spanish expedition. The battles were brutal. The Spanish suffered many losses, and Cordoba himself was mortally wounded, dying soon after the return. When the survivors limped back to Cuba, they brought one major revelation. The natives had gold. The secret was out. In 1518, 4 ships and 250 men, led by Juan de Grijalva, a 29-year-old captain hoping to trade with the natives, returned to the same coast where Cordoba had been killed, and this time managed to push back the defenders. From there, they sailed north along the shores, eventually reaching the mouth of the Grijalva River in what is now Tabasco. I visited these shores to capture this drone footage. This is the exact location they landed. Just off the beach was a mural of a Spanish ship representing what could have been seen from the shore over 500 years prior. I then proceeded to drink coconuts and eat tacos on the beach, and subsequently got the worst food poisoning I've ever had in my life. Instead of a battle, the Spaniards opened up a dialogue and traded peacefully with the locals, who spoke of a powerful ruler far inland named Montezuma, and of a kingdom overflowing with riches. Continuing along the coast, they reached the modern-day Veracruz. Smoke was rising from a nearby island, and when the Spaniards landed, they found stone temples covered in idols. Upon entrance, they noticed the walls were smeared with blood from a sacrifice that had taken place the night before. Bodies lay mutilated, hearts torn out, arms hacked away. They named this place the Island of Sacrifices. The following day, they saw 4 priests, their hair stiff with dried blood. The Spaniards claimed they even witnessed a ritual where 2 boys were sacrificed, chests opened while they were still alive. Horrified and running low on supplies, Grijalva's men turned back to Cuba. This would not be the last time the Spanish would be on this island. But they didn't return empty-handed. They carried news of gold, strange gods, and the name of a king who would soon dominate Spain's ambitions, Montezuma. Fast forward 1 year later, Hernán Cortés is drowning in debt, living a lavish lifestyle far beyond his means. He was desperate for a chance to lead an expedition to the new lands. Officially, conquest had to be approved by the crown, but for slave expeditions or scouting expeditions or even trading, you could get that approved by the governor in Cuba. So the governor reluctantly gave Cortés permission to go and scout and trade. But Cortés wasn't the type to settle for half measures. He immediately started recruiting soldiers, stockpiling weapons, and building a fleet that looked more like an army of conquest rather than a group of traders. He wasn't coming to barter, he was coming for everything. Cortés wanted the entire empire. When the governor realized what Cortés was planning to do, he sent out men to arrest him. Cortés successfully recruited many of these men to join his ranks, and the rest he subdued. Before another attempt could be made to stop him, Cortez set sail with 500 men and a handful of ships. It was all or nothing. Success would make him one of the most powerful and rich men in the world. Failure would almost certainly lead to jail time and possibly even death. They made their way to the island of Cozumel and were astonished by the Maya that were there. Soon Cortez started hearing natives saying, "Castellan, Castellan," and he inquired about this and was shocked to discover that 2 Spaniards were living among the Maya that had been cast away there a decade before, and they had been enslaved by the Maya ever since. Cortez sent men to track them down, and when they finally found one, he was unrecognizable. Dressed like a native, marked by years of hard labor, fully absorbed into Maya life. His name was Geronimo de Aguilar, and we'll refer to him as Aguilar throughout the rest of the story. 8 years earlier, he had survived a shipwreck that killed everyone else except for one other Spaniard. That survivor's name was Gonzalo Guerrero, but unlike Aguilar, Guerrero refused to return. It was Guerrero who had helped organize the original ambush that killed Captain Cordoba years earlier. Aguilar joined Cortez, and since he was fluent in both Maya and Spanish, this unlocked a gateway that would really help with diplomacy, and especially for Cortez to communicate his psychological warfare that he was about to enable on the native population. Cortez moved his fleet north to the Grijalva River, where I'd shown you the drone shot earlier that I had taken. The last time the Spanish had landed here, they traded peacefully with the locals. But this time, it was war. Thousands of native warriors were already waiting on the beach, outnumbering the Spaniards many times over. Cortez didn't hesitate. He split his forces, sending boats further up the coast, making sure to strike from behind while the main force attacked from the front. What followed was a massacre. The natives had never faced these crossbows, muskets, cavalry, or cannons. They'd never even seen a horse before. Imagine never hearing a cannon before, and then all of a sudden the ground shakes, thunder splits the air, and men around you are torn in half. The shock alone was as devastating as the weapons themselves. By the end, the battlefield was littered with bodies. Over 800 natives lay dead. The chronicler Bernal Diaz describes the scene. "When it was over, we pressed rags over our wounds, for that was all we had. The horses' wounds were seared shut, then treated with fat from a dead Indian that we had cut open for that purpose. We counted more than 800 bodies, most stabbed. Wherever the horsemen had gone, the dead were piled high." After this bloody victory at Grijalva, Cortez made it official. He proclaimed the land conquered in the name of King Charles. It was a bold move, and one that would put him in direct defiance of the governor back in Cuba. No conquest had ever been approved. The very next day, a delegation of natives arrived seeking peace and asking permission to bury their dead. For Cortez, this was the perfect chance to demonstrate some of his psychological warfare. He believed that the natives thought the cannons and horses were divine beings, and that the Spaniards were just servants. To play into that fear, Cortez staged this spectacle. He tied a mare in heat to a tree, then brought over a stallion to stir chaos. As the delegation gathered, he warned them that both the horses and cannons were very angry. If they resisted, this god would unleash its fury. Right on cue, a cannon blasts, shattering a nearby tree. All of the natives were stunned, and the message worked. The next day, they returned with gifts, including more than 20 women. Among them, one who would change everything, La Malinche. She was born near the Mayalands, but was raised to speak Nahuatl, so she was fluent in both. La Malinche could now translate Nahuatl to Mayan, and then from Mayan, Aguilar could translate that to Spanish to Cortez, and this opened up everything. From that moment forward, La Malinche and Aguilar were always at Cortez's hip. When word of Cortez reached the Aztec capital, Montezuma was reportedly fearful and stunned. According to both the Aztec and the Spanish chronicles, Montezuma was obsessed with this cycle of return, in particular the return of Quetzalcoatl. And it's this 52-year cycle, and supposedly part of the legend is that white men with beards would show up in 1519, the same year that they did, and rule over the land. And these white men were gods. But many make the argument that the blend of the white beards and the gods coming from the east was maybe added afterwards as a way to pacify the populations and make the Spanish's appearance feel like destiny. To appease these strangers, Montezuma sent gifts and even dispatched his best painters to capture the newcomers, their ships, cannons, and horses. Cortez allowed it and even struck a pose for these portraits, but before the artists left, he staged another show of power. From the Aztec accounts of the meetings, Cortez handed Montezuma's messengers spears and declared, "I've heard that Aztecs are great warriors, At dawn, 2 of yours will face 2 of us, so I can see for myself. Prepare yourself." The Aztec very quickly got out of there and retreated back to their capital city. According to the Aztec accounts, Montezuma ordered 2 captives to be sacrificed before the messengers, their hearts ripped out, their blood sprinkled over them, and then he demanded a full report of everything they had witnessed. When he heard of the Spaniards' horses, the messengers described that Montezuma was shaken. Convinced it might be the return of Quetzalcoatl, he ordered more gifts, food, jewelry, and even 2 captives to be sacrificed, just in case the Spanish wanted to drink their blood. They refused the food that they had brought with them because they had sprinkled blood on it. And what took place afterwards was a bit of an awkward meeting, where it's described that the Aztec priests started trying to do dark magic on the Spanish, but to no avail, which really intimidated them. A new opportunity presented itself when the simple Wallans started complaining about their treatment they were receiving from the Aztec and their tax collectors. Cortez seized the moment, and when the Aztec tax collectors arrived, he had them arrested and declared that the simple Wallans and the rest of the tribes in the area no longer had to serve Montezuma, but now served the King of Spain. The sneaky Cortez was also telling the Aztec captives that he was on their side and that he would soon free them to return safely to Montezuma, and he would like to meet His Excellence. Meanwhile, the Spanish and the natives built the first official settlement, Villarica de la Veracruz, and overnight Cortez cut ties with the governor of Cuba and claimed direct authority from the King of Spain himself. If he failed, he would surely be hung at this point. But not everybody was down with this. Many of his men protested and asked to be taken back to Cuba. At this point, there was enough gold for Cortez to send back a royal fifth and really make the money talk so he could get what he wanted, permission to continue forward, and really, he was going to continue no matter what. It was more so to protect him when all of this ended. A plot was uncovered by some rebels that thought that they were being held against their will, and they planned to steal a ship and sail back to Cuba. Cortez ordered a punishment of 200 lashings for each of them, and then he burned the ships, making sure that no one was leaving this conquest. They started marching to the mountains, and this was described as a very brutal trip. They had been used to the low, hot, humid beaches, and now they were going to the arid, gigantic 18,000 feet mountains and volcanoes that they had never even seen before. They were running out of food and had nothing but their armor to sleep in at night in the cold mountains. They eventually reached Zacatlan, where they got food, got the nourishment they needed, and the rest. It was here that Bernal Diaz described them counting 100,000 skulls piled up in the plazas, all put together with mortar. The Spanish eventually run into the Tlaxcaltecas, who were independent and fierce enemies of the Aztec. Under stress, Cortez made the mistake to attack and soon found himself ambushed by over 40,000 natives, who killed one of their horses, proving that these beasts were mortal. The Spanish had a large advantage with their armor, and eventually caused enough devastation during the battle that the Tlaxcalteca retreated, but the natives were not having it. They gathered 40,000 men, striking terror into many of the soldiers who were already regretting their presence in this strange land. In Kevin Siepel's book, Conquistador Voices, he describes a scene where men were lined up to see the priests for confession, as they were certain they were about to die. Cortez and many of the soldiers were suffering from fever, and it was really looking like this was going to be the end for the Spanish. Meanwhile, La Malinche is taking her own agency in being a diplomat between the two groups, constantly negotiating. The Tlaxcalteca had her tell the Spanish that they were going to eat their flesh with chilies. The Spanish sent back a message giving them 2 days to surrender and join their force, or they would kill them all. Eventually, cooler heads prevailed, and they decided they had one common goal: to take down Montezuma. Many of Cortez's men started begging him to take this opportunity to turn around and go back to Cuba. They all almost died. How could he even think about pressing his luck with the almighty Aztec? Cortez, of course, ignored all of this, reaffirming to them that they were the bravest Spaniards to ever live, and ordered everyone to prepare for the next leg of their march. With the Tlaxcalteca joining Cortez's ranks, Montezuma scrambled to stop the march, sending Cortez and his men gifts and asking what contribution their royal lords would require from the Aztec, adding that he would gladly pay it as long as the Spaniards agreed to turn around. They would regroup for several months in the now peaceful Tlaxcalteca capital. They described a scene where they were greeted by tens of thousands of natives, all on top of their buildings, with a very welcoming and festive attitude toward the Spaniards. But even here, Diaz describes more grisly scenes of human sacrifice. "We found wooden cages full of Indians, both male and female, being fattened up until they were ready to be sacrificed and eaten. We broke open and destroyed these cages and let the prisoners go. Cortez expressed his great displeasure with the caciques of Tlaxcala. They turned and promised to not kill or eat any more Indians. However, their promises had little value, since they returned to their old ways as soon as we turned our heads. During this time, Cortez is getting intelligence on the Aztec and found out that they had 150,000 warriors ready to fight the conquistadors. Only 20 miles away was Cholula, who was the sworn enemies of the Tlaxcalteca, and by October of that year, the Spaniards and 1,000 of their native allies marched toward Cholula. The natives were asked to stay outside the city since they were sworn enemies, but the Spaniards went ahead to go greet the Cholulan cacique. This scene was described by Alonso Aguilar. As we were entering the city, some priests dressed to fashion came out to meet us. They burned incense before us, but said nothing. Our allies told Cortez that this is the kind of reception that brings a bad omen. They make war and plan to either sacrifice us or just plain murder us. They continue to see more cages of fattened up Indians, and Cortez, of course, starts to preach more about how this is sinful, they're all going to hell, and they needed to stop. His Tlaxcalteca allies reported that they witnessed 5 children sacrificed to their war god, and that it was extremely clear to them that they were about to be attacked. Cortez told them to be ready outside the city and wait for his word. La Malinche then told Cortez that a native woman told her that 10,000 Aztec warriors were ready to ambush the Spaniards, and that an order had been given to slaughter all but 20 of the Spaniards, the remaining being held to be sacrificed to their gods. After delegating with his officers, the Spanish decided that a preemptive attack was the only way to survive this. They had previously arranged 2,000 Cholulan warriors to march on the Aztec capital with them, but this was a trap, and they knew it. Cortez summoned everyone to the square with a message he wanted to deliver. With La Malinche mounted on his horse, he started to address the Cholulans. He explained to them that he knew about their plot to kill the Spanish and eat their flesh with salt, chilies, and tomatoes. The priest objected and blamed it on Montezuma, saying this all was orders from him. Cortez yelled back that this was a lie, and that since they had dishonored the great Montezuma, that for this terrible sin, they would all die. A musket was fired, signaling for the Spanish to attack, and all chaos breaks loose. Bernal Diaz described it as an absolute slaughter. All warriors and priests within the village cut down. When the Tlaxcalans arrived, they did not stop at the warriors and priests. They plundered the city, taking prisoners, and the Spanish basically wrote that it was impossible to stop them at this point. The Tlaxcalteca hated the Cholulans so much, and this was their opportunity. It was reported that 5,000 to 10,000 were slaughtered. The native accounts after the conquest reported 20,000 dead. After this massacre, Cortez immediately wrote about it in a second letter to Charles V. He claimed that the Cholulan leaders had plotted to trap and kill the Spaniards on Montezuma's orders, and that his strike was therefore a justified preemptive action. In the Floretine Codex, the natives described this as a trick by Cortez to lure them all into the square where he massacred them. Diaz writes in his chronicles that once Montezuma found out about this massacre, that he locked himself up for 2 days, sacrificing men to his sun god, trying to figure out what message he should send the Spaniards, and eventually he gave them an invitation to meet him in the city. Cortez accepted this offer despite the Tlaxcalans telling him that this was definitely a trap. In any case, 1,000 Tlaxcalan warriors and porters joined the Spaniards in March of that year as they headed toward the capital. The conquistadors were shocked when they saw their first volcano. We were all astonished by this, including Cortez, since he had never seen a volcano before. One of our captains, Diego de Ordaz, asked permission of Cortez to climb up there and see what it was. Cortez not only gave him his permission, but actually ordered him to go up. He took 2 soldiers and several Indians with him. When they had gone halfway up the mountain, the Indians were frightened and tried to dissuade Diego from climbing higher. There were earth tremors, flames, and stones and ash that were being thrown from the mouth of the volcano. They then continued their climb to the crater. From there, they could see the great city of Mexico, with its lakes and surrounding towns. In a desperate attempt to get the Spanish to turn around, Montezuma sends the Spanish more gold, lots of it. The Aztec account of this moment describes the Spanish lusting at the sight of this gold, holding on to it, clutching it, and examining every inch of the gold with joy and excitement. And this, of course, would have the opposite effect on the Spanish. They wanted to meet Montezuma more than ever. When the Spaniards entered the outskirts of the city, their minds were blown. Bernal Diaz admitted that he had never imagined such beauty and believed nothing greater could ever be found. We were struck speechless by the things we saw. It was hard to accept that it was real. On the one hand, the great cities filled the land, on the lakes even more. Canoes were everywhere. Before us was the great city of Mexico, and we were fewer than 400 soldiers. We couldn't help but remember the warnings from the Indians and all the others who had told us not to go to Mexico, and that once they had us inside, they would kill us all. As we drew near to Mexico, the great Montezuma stepped down from his litter, supported by 2 great lords beneath a canopy of extraordinary riches. Many of his nobles walked ahead of Montezuma, sweeping the ground wherever he went to pass. We were astonished by this. After what's described as an awkward but cheerful meeting between Montezuma and Cortez, the 2 sides exchanged gifts. The Spanish reported that Montezuma accepted their emperor as king and that he knew they were coming. Aguilar wrote, "For it was quite true that his ancestors had told him that men with beards who came from the direction of the sunrise would govern these lands, and from all he had seen, we were those men." Despite a peaceful meeting, Cortez of course has to throw a curveball in there. When they got settled into their living quarters, he ordered a cannon be fired, which caused the entire city to stop in terror. An Aztec chronicler documented this moment. "The Spaniards fired one of their cannons, and it caused great confusion in the city. The people scattered in every direction. It was as if they had eaten the mushrooms that confuse the mind, or had seen some dreadful apparition. They were all overcome by terror, as if their hearts had fainted. And when the night fell, the panic spread throughout the city, and their fears would not let them sleep." As time went on, the Spaniards got whatever they requested from Montezuma, and this was starting to really upset Montezuma's priests, nobles, and advisors. They were losing respect for him quickly. Cortez eventually met with Montezuma and explained to them that he had been sent by his king from the east to convert Montezuma and his people to Christians, explaining to them that if Montezuma did not stop sacrificing children and idol worship, that he would burn in hell. "I had heard that he frequently ate the flesh of young boys. Since he had such a variety of dishes in front of him, though, we couldn't tell if some of them might have been human flesh or if they were something else, so we tried not to look at what he was eating. I do know that once our captain had confronted him about making human sacrifices and eating human flesh, he ordered that this no longer be served to him." The Spaniards were stunned when they saw the main temple of the city. But this was overshadowed by horror. One chronicler estimated 136,000 skulls mounted on poles with mortar. Eventually they saw the markets, and the Spanish were very impressed. They had slaves, gold, food, herbs, wild animals, and even what the Spanish described as entire canoe loads of human excrement that was used to manufacture salt and cure animal hides. They walked up the steps of the large pyramid in the center, and Bernal Diaz wrote about what he describes as hell. Images of devils and bodies of serpents surround the door. A little apart from there stood a palace of sacrifice, all black with smoke and encrusted blood. Inside the house we saw many pots, pitchers, and jars, all filled with water, for it was here that they cooked the poor Indians after they had been sacrificed, and were eaten by the papas. I always thought of that house as hell. When the Spanish got back to their dwellings, they were kind of snooping around and found out that Montezuma's father's entire stash of gold was hidden right where they were sleeping, and they kept their knowledge about this secret. As time grew on, Cortez and his captains began to grow more concerned about the very dangerous situation they were in. They were outnumbered 40-1. News had just arrived that the Spaniards had been killed by natives on the coast, and it was clear that the Aztec were behind the attack. A decision was made to take Montezuma captive. They explained to him that he could rule over his people, but it would need to be under their custody while they sorted out the injustice of the dead Spanish men. After some time, Montezuma requested that he be allowed to make his sacrifices. The Spanish agreed as long as it was animals and not human sacrifices. And when they escorted him to his temples for this ritual, Montezuma broke his promise, and his priests brought out men and boys to be sacrificed. There was not much the Spanish could do about it. Greatly outnumbered in a very delicate situation, they said nothing and decided to just pick their own battles. Meanwhile, secretly, the Spanish were building ships, just in case they needed to escape the city. They explained to Montezuma that these were just for recreation. Many months go by as the Spanish continue to plot, and their welcome that they received starts to fade. Right as the Aztecs stop bringing them food on a regular basis, Cortez gets word that over 900 Spaniards have arrived on the coast, and they were there to arrest Cortez. Meanwhile, Montezuma apparently knew about this and sent them gifts as well, kind of playing both sides. Cortez had to go deal with this, so he leaves for the coast, taking many of his men with him, leaving behind a smaller group that's paranoid at this point, low morale, and not getting the proper nourishment they need each day to sustain themselves. Cortez eventually did a sneak attack on the Spanish camp. After a brief struggle, Captain Navarez, who was sent to arrest Cortez, refused to surrender, lost his eye, and it was over. Now Cortez had 900 Spanish soldiers. Meanwhile, back in the capital, a major conflict is brewing. Tensions in the city were high. The Spanish presence had become unbearable. Strange demands, desecration of idols, constant pressure for gold. Then came Tlaxcala, which was a festival for one of their gods. Since Cortez was gone, Alvarado was now in charge, and the Aztec asked him for permission to do their festival. He agreed, and that decision would soon set fire to everything. The courtyard of Templo Mayor was filled with dancers. There were nobles, priests, singers, all dressed in brilliant costumes of feathers, jade, and gold. They moved in rhythm as they celebrated their festival. To the Aztec, this was one of the holiest moments of their calendar. But to the Spaniards watching them from the palace walls, it looked like something else. Alvarado later claimed that he had intelligence that the Aztec planned to use the festival to ambush the garrison. Whether or not this was paranoia or a genuine concern is still debated. According to the Aztec accounts preserved in the Floretine Codex, the Spaniards acted first. Then they stabbed everyone with iron lances and struck them with iron swords. Some they hacked on the calves, some on the thighs, some on their bellies, and then all their entrails would spill out. And there were some who were still running in vain. They were dragging their intestines and seemed to get their feet caught up in them. Eager to get to safety, they found nowhere to go. Whether or not it was a preemptive strike or an unprovoked butchery, the outcome remained the same. Rivers of blood flowed across the courtyard of Templo Mayor, and the natives were furious. News of this massacre spread like wildfire. The streets were filled with armed men. Tens of thousands of Aztec warriors surged toward the palace compound where the Spaniards were barricaded. For days they rained down arrows, stones, and spears. The Spaniards were trapped, low on food, low on water, unable to move, and Alvarado's rash actions had turned the city into a cage. Desperate, they sent word of their situation to the coast, hoping that Cortez could intervene. Now Cortez had access to 900 additional Spanish soldiers, convincing many of them with gold that it would be worth their while to follow him, and hurried back to the city. The Spaniards had brought Montezuma to the palace walls, hoping he could calm down the situation. According to the Spanish sources, Montezuma pleaded with his people to cease fighting, asking them to lay down their arms. But the crowd erupted in fury. Stones and darts filled the air, and Montezuma was struck. He died days later, the Spanish claiming that he succumbed to the wounds that he faced from the natives. But the Aztec accounts tell a darker story, that the Spaniards murdered him once he ceased to be useful. Either way, Montezuma was dead. The city exploded into all-out war. Trapped inside this palace with no food, the Spaniards endured a relentless assault. Cortez realized there was no way to hold the capital. He gave the order, prepare to retreat. They would flee the city by night, and that retreat would become known as La Noche Triste, the sad night. The plan was simple: march out under the cover of darkness, crossing the causeways, and escape to the mainland. But the Aztec knew every inch of this city. They smashed the bridges, cut off all exits, and swarmed from canoes on both sides. The Spaniards were struggling across the causeway, crossing with these makeshift beams they had created, but greed and the weight of gold would hold them back. Many of our soldiers, greedy for treasure, loaded themselves with it, and in crossing the bridges, they fell into the water and drowned. Hundreds of men and horses, both Spaniards and allies, sank into the lake, being drowned by the riches that they came to steal. In the book Conquistador Voices by Kevin Seipel, he explains a situation that occurred where the only way to cross was to use this pile of dead bodies as its own bridge, even pushing allies that were still alive into the water so they could try to cross. And this retreat became a slaughter. Warriors filled the causeways, hacking and stabbing with obsidian blades. Cortez himself was badly wounded in the leg during this disaster of a moment. Hundreds of conquistadors cut off and were captured on the causeway. Many of them were killed on the spot, but a very large number were kept alive to be sacrificed. They had lost more than half their forces, and that night they listened to their brothers scream as their chests were ripped open in clear sight. Diaz wrote that Cortez wept at this great tragedy, stopping for a moment to sob before continuing to retreat. But the Aztec pursued relentlessly. What was left of the Spanish continued to limp back to Tlaxcala, fighting the Aztec attacks along the way. At last they had reached refuge, and for over 20 days they rested, gathered themselves, and healed their wounds. Many who felt no loyalty to Cortez at this point asked to go back to Veracruz. They filed protests, denounced Cortez, and begged to sail home. Cortez stood firm. He reminded them of honor, of God, and of the gold that was still waiting back at the Aztec capital. And just like previous cases, he would successfully convince them to march again. But lucky for Cortez, something terrible was taking place back at the capital. Smallpox swept the valley. The streets were filling up with the dead, and even Montezuma's successor had died. A young and fierce ruler took his place. This was Cortez's opportunity. After healing from their wounds, they started to build forces with their new native and Spaniard reinforcements. A bombardment and conquest of the city was now being planned. And by 1521, the siege was ready. 1,000 Spanish soldiers and tens of thousands of native allies marched toward the city, which had been reinforced and ready to defend despite the smallpox outbreak. The aqueduct of Chapultepec was cut, leaving the city without water. Brigantines that had been built from scrap swept the lake, overturning thousands of canoes. They unleashed this bombardment, and the fighting lasted months, and they sustained heavy losses. More soldiers were captured and sacrificed. Cortez then turned to a strategy of burning the houses of the commoners, further adding to their discomfort. A few months later, by August, famine and disease had filled the city. The lake was fully controlled, supplies were cut off, and the Aztecs started to abandon their new leader. This young emperor fled in a royal canoe, carrying his family and treasure, but was later captured by the Spanish. He reportedly said to Cortez, "Malinche, I have done my duty in defending my city. I can do no more. I'm a prisoner before you, taken by stronger force. Now draw the dagger you have in your belt and kill me." Cortez reportedly refused, embraced him, and promised honor. The siege was now complete. For 80 days, the drums and trumpets of war had never ceased. Now there was only silence, broken by the stench of death. Hundreds of thousands were dead, bodies clogged the canals, houses were full of corpses, and starving survivors streamed out in endless lines. The stench was unbearable, and Cortez himself became ill and plagued with daily migraines due to the smell. He ordered that the streets be cleaned, water restored, and the bridges rebuilt. Rumors had started to spread that the young Aztec king had sunk the gold in the lake. Cortez then ordered the torturing of this emperor, having his feet burned with oil. But despite this, little was found. Discontent boiled among the soldiers, shares of wealth were pitiful. There were satirical verses of graffiti mocking Cortez that appeared on the wall, expressing their displeasure with Cortez and blaming him for stealing the gold. After the fall of the Aztec capital in 1521, Hernán Cortés stood, briefly, as one of the most powerful men in the world. He was named governor and captain general of New Spain, oversaw the rebuilding of Mexico City, and sent expeditions to Honduras, the Pacific coast, and even Baja California. But triumph soon gave way to conflict. Royal officials and rivals accused him of corruption and tyranny, and for the rest of his life, he would fight endless legal battles, returning to Spain to defend his reputation. He died in 1547 in Seville. Millions of indigenous would perish from disease and starvation, war, and forced labor. Meanwhile, gold and silver from the Americas poured into Europe, fueling Spain's rise as the richest kingdom on earth, in an era known as Spain's Golden Age, a subject for a future video. And as this new order settled, rumors spread of another kingdom further south, with even more riches and gold. This land had mountains and roads, and before long, Francisco Pizarro would march on modern-day Peru, and the conquest of the Inca would rival, even surpass, the drama of Mexico. Stay tuned, I'm currently working on producing that story. And thank you so much for watching my videos. If you'd like to support my work, please get yourself a map. Mirrorway Maps has state maps, 3D maps, country maps, and I just ask that you please use the specific link in my bio so I can get credit for your purchase. I'll have that linked right next to my book, Enigmatic North America, that I wrote over 2 years ago now. This is a coffee table style book that friends and family can enjoy, learning about the mysteries of North America, many hoaxes, many legends, and some genuine anomalies that have still yet to be explained. I also am doing a few small group tours every year to some incredible ancient sites throughout the Americas. So please go check out the upcoming group tours. I would love to have you join. Please like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Thank you everybody for watching my videos. Take care.